we have a question. There is a Hussein, Muhammad Hussein. Yes, Hussein, please. You can directly communicate.
Thank you so much, Prof, for the wonderful presentation. So, like, this was kind of mind blowing in a sense, and like obviously, I also share the name of Hussein with MF Hussein, but I just heard of his name, but I never knew who he was or what he did. So, Prof, my question was about the word that you used, cosmopolitanism. So, like, you taught us about Shah Ahmed as also coming from within this tradition of cosmopolitanism. So, do you think they both come from a similar kind of ideal that you say that Muslim cosmopolitans? Like, what is the similarity? What's the difference when we speak about Shahab Ahmed versus Imam Hussein in terms of ideas and what they have to contribute?
Well, first of all, let me say that I speak with affection, but also humility about Shahab Ahmed. I had the privilege of knowing him. And also I mentioned Jadal wa Tafahum. I had the privilege of debating with him. And what we debated was not about whether Islam is cosmopolitan or not, but whether you can use the word Islamicate. So you may have noticed that in a couple places in my very brief talk, and Rajiv knows this from having been in one of my classes, that I think to expand cosmopolitan, to really give it the full arc of meaning that it has for the Muslim world and for the history of Islam from the 8th, actually going back from the 7th century to the 21st century for 1400 years, Islam is both the faith, deen, is deen and dawla, but it's also umran. And I think when you talk about Islam as umran, it exceeds the bounds of faith, the way MF Hussein talks about it. And Shahab Ahmed, I don't know whether you remember the beginning of his book, he says, I dedicate this to my parents who taught me that you are a cosmopolitan before you're a Muslim. And I thought, what does that mean?
I remember that.
Because he's born a Muslim, he has the Shahada said in his ears before he even knows what it is. So how can he be cosmopolitan before he's Muslim? But what he's trying to say is cosmopolitan means you're relating to a whole channel of being that goes vertically, not horizontally. Muslim means you belong to a community of people on here, but the essence of Islam and being Muslim is the vertical ascent of faith. But for Ahmed, as for Hussein, for Shahab Ahmed, as for Maqbul Fida Hussein, there is also this notion of being identified with all of humanity. So I call that larger arc of human cosmopolitanism Islamicate rather than simply Muslim or Islamic. So that's where I both agree and disagree with Shahab Ahmed. The one thing that Shahab Ahmed did that is totally brilliant, that nobody else has done, is he's talked about the fact that you have this, I'm going to use one of the words that he used, you have this thing called mazhab-e-ishq. I think you've either read enough or thought about that he has. And now I'm going to really please Rajiv, because Rajiv said you can't finish your lecture without giving us the Iqbal verse. So the Iqbal verse is Sataron se age jahan aur bhi hai, asma aur ji hai, islam aur bhi hai, ishq imtihan aur bhi hai. So the last line of that verse from Iqbal, ishq imtihan aur bhi hai. So the imtihan, the testing, the trial of ishq still has more to go. So Sataron Jayage, are there more worlds beyond this? Are there more heavens beyond this? Yes, there are more heavens, but there's also more labor for ishq. And what I really admire about Shahab Ahmed is he took this idea from Iqbal or from any other Urdu or Persian or even Arabic poet, the idea that ishq is something expansive, and he put it into a frame called madhab. And most people think of madhab and madahib as referring to, if you're Shiite, it's Jafari, or it could be Ismaili. If you're Sunni, it can be Maliki, or it can be Shafi, or it can be Hanbali or Hanafi for most Muslims, of course, from South Asia. But madhab is juridical. It refers to fiqh. It comprises Sharia. But what Shahab Ahmed did, which is totally brilliant, he didn't invent the term. He took it actually from a Persian poet in the 11th century, but he took Shamsavri's notion of madhab-e-ishq and made it into a whole theory of civilization. So his book, What is Islam, the importance of being Islamic is all about showing how there are convergent but contradictory notions in what it is to be Islamic. And I find it easier to talk about the contradictory elements under the rubric Islamicate instead of Islamic. In fact, I met somebody from Harvard who'd been a student of his, doesn't matter who, but I could tell you the genealogy of that person. But that person said that he's redefining Islamic in terms of what Hodgson meant by Islamicate. So when you read Islamic in Shahab Ahmed, it's not Islamic going back to the 17th century or the 7th century. It's Islamic as being this cosmopolitan expanse of Umran, of civilization, that encompasses many cultures, many traditions, many perspectives that aren't related only to deen or dawlat, but also to a larger civilization envelope. So you ask a very good question, but that's my simple answer or short answer is I have great respect and great affection, more than respect, affection for Shahab Ahmed. I think, by the way, his notion of delineating a specific region called Balkans to Bengal, which he does in territorial term, is very important for the 12th to the 18th century. My problem is Balkans to Bengal leaves out Andalusia. Remember my picture showed Al-Andalus, southern Spain? Balkans to Bengal does not stretch enough west to go there. And my biggest grievance is it leaves out the Indian Ocean that includes Nusantara, which is Malaysia, the Philippines, and Indonesia, all of which I think are part of Dar al-Islam and part of the larger Islamicate arc. So I admire his brilliance, his insight, his fixation on Madhab-e-Ishq, and I like Balkans to Bengal because it rhymes. It's easy to remember from the 12th to the 18th century. But I think on both sides, before the 12th century and after the 18th century, you have to include Al-Andalus and Nusantara, or Southeast Asia.
Thank you.
We have two participants who raised the hand. One is Sadaf and one is Miraz. So let's take from Sadaf. Okay, Miraz, okay.
Thank you so much, Professor Lawrence, for your thought-provoking speech. And I am from Madrasa background. You have made me read.
My own sense of this, and from having known and had the privilege of knowing Maqbul Fida Husain, I think the reason why, first of all, let me explain the letters that come at the beginning of some of the Quranic surahs. Muqata'at, they're called muqata'at, the cutoff, the single letters, of which Ha, Mim, Ain, Sin, Qaf is one. I call it Alif, Lam, Mim comes in Baqarah. There are many, and there's Ha, Mim that is a whole series of surahs that are called the Ha, Mim surahs. So I'm sure if you come from madrasa training, you know about the muqata'at, the cutoff letters.
Yes.
So many people, and I have met many very devout and very open-minded Muslims who say, you just don't even look at the muqata'at. You pronounce them when you recite the Holy Quran, but only Allah Ta'ala. Allahu Alam Bisawab. Only God knows the answer of what's really true for them. So one answer is...
Yes, actually my intention, sir, sorry to interrupt. Actually, my intention was that I remember that whenever we used to ask about these words, muqata'at, Maulana or our teachers always say that you cannot ask or you cannot know the meaning of these words. So I was just trying. So if you have any insight or some ideas about these words, as per your experience of reading Islamic text or meeting important personality of who belongs to Islam religion. That's why I was asking it.
Yeah, well, and what I was going to say to you is that I respect the opinion of those who say you absolutely, you can't go there. But let me just give you one instance, and this is something which could be, again, a whole lecture. So one of the people who I have studied and studied intensely is Muhammad Asad. Muhammad Asad, who has done his own translation of the Holy Quran called The Message of the Quran. Are you familiar with that?
No, I have not heard about him.
So if you look up in your library, you'll see that there's this one very major scholar named Muhammad Asad. His son, Talal Asad, is a famous anthropologist in America. But Muhammad Asad was a convert from Judaism to Islam in the 20th century. And he devoted the last 20 years of his life to doing nothing but translating the Holy Quran. And he became fascinated with Qata'at. And he also spent a long time in Arabia. After he converted to Islam, he married a Bedouin woman who was actually the mother of Talal Asad, but she died after a couple of years. So then he later remarried a Polish woman who also converted to Islam. But if you want to read what I think is a marvelous story about somebody who travels and becomes Muslim, travels in his mind and then becomes Muslim in his faith and outlook, it's called The Road to Mecca. The Road to Mecca by Muhammad Asad. But to get back to your question about the Muqatta'at, when he came to Surah Yasin, he said, all my Muslim friends and all the people with whom I associate are Muslims say that after Surah Al-Fatiha and Surah Al-Ikhlas, the most important surah is Surah Yasin. And I don't know whether you agree or disagree with that, but certainly you could say that Fatiha is the most important, that Ikhlas is important also for some other reasons. But Yasin, at every janazah I've ever attended, Yasin is always recited. So it's arguably one of the most important of all of the surahs in the Holy Quran. And yet it only has 2 letters, Yasin. It doesn't give you a title like Fatiha or Ikhlas. It gives you just 2 letters. So he was fascinated with that, and he finally decided that Yasin actually stands for Ya Insan. And so it opens up a whole world as being addressed to humankind, not just to man, but to humankind, Ya Insan. And so he does an elaborate, in his commentary that comes with his translation of the Holy Quran, he explains what Yasin means. But even Muhammad Asad, when he comes to Ha Mim Ain Sin Qaf, draws a blank and says, I don't know what it means. So he tries to give some insight into ones that he can understand, like Yasin. But when he comes to Surah Shura, which starts out with Ha Mim, then Ain Sin Qaf, he says, Allahu Alam Bisawab. I don't know, I give up, I surrender. Husain, when I talk to him about this, he says, the most important thing is not the Ha Mim, because the Ha Mim obviously in some ways is referring to Muhammad. He didn't tell me how Ha Mim becomes Muhammad, but somehow Ha Mim, obviously both letters come up in the name Muhammad, but in different order. But for him, Ha Mim is a reference to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He talks about that. But then he uses, and he says, Ain Sin Qaf is a way of predicting Ishq in the Quran. Now, I've never heard.
That's really a new insight or new kind of way of thinking or looking at Quran. That's really and that's broad, because no Maulanas or no Islamic scholar even talk about these words. They just say that no, these words are we have not found, or we don't have any explanations in early tafsir books like Tafsir Ibn Kasir or Tafsir Ibn Abbas,
or even
so
Tabari,
they refuse.
or
but now I am,
or Razi, you don't find it, or Kushayri.
yes, so we don't find mention about these things in these early tafsirs. But these, I think this is the influence of cosmopolitanism or the modern world.
It's imagination.
Yeah, I think if you ever have a chance to look at the paintings of M.F. Husain and you see the way in which he plays with calligraphy, with Arabic letters, and with the meaning of it, for him, there is something really that he has a basic notion, which I found in some other Muslim scholars as well, that there's nothing, just as there's nothing wasted in creation, there's nothing wasted in the Quran. So if there are these muqatta'at at the beginning of each of some surahs, they must have some meaning. There must be some relevance. And it's not for Allah to explain, because it's been revealed to the Prophet. It's for us to try to understand. So I take that as a mandate. It's a very difficult mandate, but a mandate that M.F. Husain himself espoused. So that's my brief answer. Maybe not so brief, but my answer to your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. That was really new ways or new ideas to think about. Otherwise, we have not never thought about this, but we should try. And these last words is really important and thought-provoking. That the Quran has been given to us, so this is a mandate or order. That's why everywhere in Quran it is said, "Afala yatafakkarun aw fala tatafakkarun."
Yeah.
It always inside us or encourage us to think and think beyond imagination, like you recited the verses of Allama Iqbal. So he is also reference to think more about it, about Quran, and look for other answers that are not answers, still that are not revealed to us. So we should try for this. Thank you so much, sir. That was really nice.
Thank you.
We have one more question from Hussein. Is there literature which explores Muslim cosmopolitanism and its relation to the notion of barzakh?
Is that the question?
Yeah, this was the question. Is there any literature available on which relates to the notion of barzakh and cosmopolitanism, Muslim cosmopolitanism?
Well, I can tell you one, but you're not going to like it. You're not going to like it because it's a very big book if you haven't read it. The Futuhat al-Makkiyya of Sheikh Muhyiddin Ibn al-Arabi.
Yes, that is really big. Futuhatul Makkiyya. That was in our library in madrasa, and we just looked at that, and then we used to come back. That was just for the blessings of eyes, not for the reading.
The blessing of the eyes, and it's very tough on the mind. But let me just see if I can, in the briefest terms, I haven't read all of Futuhat al-Makkiyya, but I've read different parts of it, and I've tried to absorb something of the Fusus al-Hikam of Ibn Arabi and understand why he has this particular view that all of the Asma al-Husna, all of the beautiful names, are like portals of light, but also you can only see one light at a time. Because we're human, we can't see all the portals. That is Allah Ta'ala. But the little portals of light are the ones that, and what Ibn Arabi tries to say, which I think is really quite beautiful, is that we can't understand one by one. We have to understand 1 plus 1. So what comes up insistently in the Quran is there is always insan and jinn, but there's also 2 different traits of Allah. From the very beginning, it's not Bismillah ar-Rahman or Bismillah ar-Rahim, it's Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So even from the very beginning, the first intimation of how one thinks of Allah is not as 1, but as 2. Doesn't mean he's divided or that there's 2 different gods, but it means that you have to have a double entry. And that's what barzakh is. So one could say, using barzakh logic, that Rahman is not Rahim, but each reinforces the other. So I don't know how many of you have read Tabari, but Tabari has this wonderful thing where he says, there's nothing in the Quran which is redundant, but there is repetition. And the repetition is to develop things. It's never redundant. It doesn't repeat itself, but it's repetition in order to build, in order to expand. So Tabari says about Rahman, you can go read Tabari, but this is my take on him and why it's barzakh logic. Rahman is fa'alan. It comes from grammar. Is fa'alan, meaning someone who does something. So fa'alan is kind of the biggest description of something that is done. But Rahim is fa'il, meaning something that is more concentrated. So fa'alan is the big picture, and fa'il or Rahim is the small picture. So that means, in a sense, that God is both this big form of mercy or compassion and also this small form. So how do you translate this? And one of the things that, as Rajiv knows, I say this, I think, in my book, either the one on the Quran and translation or another one I did on the Quran biography. And this comes from Ibn Arabi, but also more directly from Tabari, is that the Fa'alan, the Rahman, means everything. So God in one sense, is the whole world, the whole universe is Rahman. But the individual experience of Rahma, to use a word in Arabic that precedes both Rahman and Rahim, the Rahma or mercy of God is only experienced in the Rahim for individuals. The Rahman is the universe. It's the whole cosmos. It's beyond our imagination. And Rahim is that little bit we experience. And a Sufi master once explained it to me by saying that in Rahman you have the dot in the middle of the noon, and that's the universe. And then you have the two dots under the ya in Rahim, and that's the individual, the two eyes of the individual. So you have the black hole theory of Rahman, which is it's the dot in the middle of the noon. That's my theory. It's the black hole in the middle of the noon. It's the whole universe, but all you can see is a dot and empty space around it. So that's Rahman. That's one part of Barzakh. The other part of Barzakh is a small Rahim, which is smaller, like we're smaller. We are, human beings, are a very small part of the universe. It's the two dots under the ya in the Rahim. So you have everything and something. Are they different? Of course. Are they unrelated? No. But does one cancel the other? No. It's Barzakh logic. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Professor. We have one student from Aligarh, from your favorite place, where you have been already, Muhammad Rafi, and he was very excited when he got to know, and he has one question for you.
Go ahead, Muhammad.
Thank you so much, Professor Lawrence, for giving us insight about certain personalities of MF Husain that we didn't knew. And I am completely new to the personality of MF Husain. I never knew that he was so much interesting. So, sir, I have a question for you, and I would like to connect this question to the first answer of yours, where you talked about the verses of Allama Iqbal, ki ishq ke aage imtihan aur bhi hai. So my question is related to your ishq with Islam, and I hope that your journey with Islam had been very nice. So I just want to ask that while you were discovering your ishq with Islam, would you like to share just any instance or important experience that you have never shared with anybody till now? Just one that experience. This is my first question, and my second question is that, are you a Muslim? And if not, why? Thank you so much, sir.
So the second question is easier to answer than the first. So when people are asking Muslim, I say, my answer to that question is everybody's a Muslim, only some people recognize it.
Oh, thank you so much, sir. I'm excited to answer our first question.
As you know, in Arabic, you don't write Muslim with a capital M, you write it with a small m. There's no capital M in Arabic. And so some people say, well, that means you have to define yourself in English between Muslim with a capital M. And I say Muslim with a capital M and a small m is already a form of colonialism. It's a form of accepting a hegemonic tradition and alphabet. So I very much identify myself as a Muslim with a small m. And my experience of ishq, I've had many experiences of ishq, but I think the one I talked about with MF Husain is probably closest, but the other form of ishq is that he himself was not only in love with women, but also in love with comedial characters. So one of the things that I have learned about ishq is if you take it too seriously, if you think it's only great mystics or great philosophers or great famous people, you miss it. So for instance, MF Husain found great humor in just very ordinary people. And it wasn't that he laughed at them, he laughed with them. So that story that was just told about him accepting being rejected from the Jahani Art Gallery. So once when we were in Doha, there was a big opening of something called the Museum of Islamic Art, Museum of Arab Art rather. And all these fancy people were coming there. And I came with MF Husain, they said, no, you can't come in. And I said, why not? And they said, because the royal couple hasn't come. I said, somebody who's greater than royalty is with me. It's MF Husain. This is in Qatar, where they have emirs and they have queens and they have princes. And so the person said, who is this? And I said, it's MF Husain. And the person said, you're right. Let him in. So to me, that was a moment of ishq when that person who was a guard, he could have been fired, but he recognized that there was something in MF Husain that is bigger than a queen or a king or an emir or a prince. And I think that was the secret of Imam Husain. He left poverty and wealth and everything behind, but he never left behind humility.
Yeah, I really thankful, and that makes, I mean, you concluded with the last word, and that makes you for me very special.
Well, thank you all very much. It's my pleasure. May Umran succeed everywhere.
Thank you. I mean,
Beginning in Bahar.
I mean.